computers actually do the job that they do. This is the perfect time to play it since we're going to talk about processors.
See how computers add numbers in one lesson. Inside a computer, you'll find a motherboard. The motherboard acts like the chassis inside a car, giving all the components the motherboard is the microprocessor. Most microprocessors have some jagged metal on top called a heatsink to prevent overheating. If you remove the microprocessor and look underneath, you'll see a lot of wires sticking out that connect from the holes in the motherboard to the main part of the microprocessor. The microprocessor is made up of different areas that do different things, such as adding or storing numbers. These areas are mostly made up of one thing, though, the transistor. Here is a 3D view of one. The transistor's base is a semiconductor, which sometimes conducts electricity and sometimes does not. The semiconductor has positively charged areas and negatively charged areas. Electricity will not flow between the two yellow areas unless a conducting channel is opened up in the green area. A conducting channel is opened up in a semiconductor when a conductor, such as metal, is placed above the gap, wrapped in an insulator like glass, and electrified. For electricity to flow from the conducting channel between the yellow areas, there must be a source and a drain. In other words, an input and an output. These are both made from conductors as well, like metal. If the input is charged, it cannot flow to the output unless the gate, which is the piece of metal in the middle, is also charged. When the gate is charged, it opens up the conducting channel in the semiconductor, allowing electricity to flow down to the source, over to the other side of the semiconductor, and back up out the drain. The neat thing about this setup is that there are no moving parts, and you are using electricity alone to turn on and off other electricity. The breakthrough idea with this technology was using it to form logic gates. For instance, if you have two transistors and you add power to the inputs of each transistor, and then add switches to each of the gates and allow the outputs to both flow directly to the light bulb, you have created an OR gate, which has this symbol. Turn the left switch on, or the right switch on, or even both switches on, and the light bulb turns on. If you change the wiring so that the output wire of the first transistor runs to the input wire of the second transistor, then you've created an AND gate, which has this symbol. With an AND gate, if you only turn the left switch on, then the light bulb is not on because the electricity coming from the first transistor is stopped at the second transistor. If you only turn the right switch on, the light bulb is not on because there is no electricity flowing through the first transistor to reach the input of the second transistor, so the light bulb does not turn on. Both switches must be on in an AND gate for the output to be on as well. On and off can be represented in the case of the switches as 0 off and 1 on. Same with the light bulbs, off or on, 0 or 1. Zeros and ones are the language of computers, and they make up their own numbering system called binary. Let's start counting in our normal decimal system and make a note of any binary numbers that we run across. In other words, any numbers that only have ones and zeros in them. So to begin, we record 0 because it only has ones and zeros in it. Same with 1. We have to wait to record another number in binary until we get to number 10. Then 11 works, 12 does not, 13 no, 14 no. In fact, we can count by tens at this point because we won't see another number with only ones and zeros until we get to 100. But then 101 works, and then nothing again until 110 and 111. And we won't see all ones and zeros again until we get all the way up to 1,000. Well, let's move that 1,000 over and down and keep counting up in binary. To do this, all we have to do is just repeat the numbers from the right column into the left column, except for the first digit, to see all the numbers above 1,000 in binary. So 1001, 1010, 1011, 1100, 1101, 1110, 1111. Now let's move those numbers back up and then into the middle of the screen where we can spread them out and add light bulbs underneath them. If you'll remember from earlier, we can represent binary numbers with light bulbs that are 0 if off and 1 if on. So we start with all zeros, or all light bulbs off, then move to 1, where only the light bulb on the far right is on, and then 10, which is the same as the number 2 in decimal. Remember, we only have 2 symbols to use in binary, 1 and 0. This means that we have to count up a little differently than we do when we use decimal numbers. 11 is 3 in decimal because it's the third binary number. 100 is 4, and on and on and on. In fact, let's make this easier. When only one light bulb is on, let's write the decimal number that it represents on the light bulb itself. For instance, 1 in binary is also 1 in decimal, so we'll write that on that light bulb. 10 in binary is 2 in decimal. 100 in binary is 4 in decimal. And 1000 in binary is 8 in decimal. From here, you just have to add up the numbers in the light bulbs that are lit to find the equivalent number in decimal. So for instance, 1001 is the 8 light bulb plus the 1 light bulb, which means it's 9 in decimal. 1010 is the 8 light bulb plus the 2 light bulb, which is 10 in decimal. And finally, 1011 is the 8 light bulb plus the 2 light bulb plus the 1 light bulb, which is 11 in decimal. So 1 plus 1 in binary equals 10, which is 2 in decimal. Since switches can also represent ones and zeros, let's put 2 switches on the left and then an adding machine in the middle to see how we can do this with the logic gates we made earlier. This adding machine is called a full adder because it's made up of 2 half adders, and we'll see why in just a minute. Now, inside the half adder, it's easy to hook up the switches to the left light bulb. All we have to do is use an AND gate. Both switches then have to be on for the left light bulb to be on. Now, to turn on the right light bulb, we'll use what's called an exclusive OR gate, which is represented by the letters XOR. The exclusive OR gate acts just the way you would expect. Either one switch or the other switch has to be on exclusively for the output to be on as well. If both switches are on, or if both switches are off, the output will be off. Now, what makes up this exclusive OR gate? Well, it's an OR gate, a NAND gate, and an AND gate. Well, what's a NAND gate? That's just an AND gate with a NOT gate on the back end. The NOT gate just flips whatever the output is to its opposite. In other words, the NAND gate is only off if both inputs are on, the exact opposite of the AND gate. This is the key part of the exclusive OR gate. Now let's see how this works when we turn just the top switch on. The OR output in the exclusive OR gate is on, and the NAND output is on, so the AND output is on as well, and therefore the right light bulb is on. Now, if we turn the top switch off and the bottom switch on, we'll get the exact same result. If both switches are on, though, the exclusive OR gate is off, but the separate AND gate below it is on, causing the left light bulb to be on. In other words, 1 plus 1 equals 10. In reality, though, when you add decimal numbers, such as 7 and 7 to get 14, the 1 is considered the number that has to be carried to the next column. And in fact, that's just how it works with binary as well. Normally, you would have several full adders right next to each other. The left light bulb next to our full adder would actually be the number that carries to the next full adder. So let's remove the left light bulb and run that wire down to the next full adder as the carryout, while at the same time accepting a carry-in wire from the previous full adder. This carry-in wire is why we need another half adder in order to make our full adder. The two separate AND gates in our half adders connect to an additional OR gate at the bottom right, which then powers our carryout wire. So here our two switches are already on, and if the carry-in wire from the previous adder is also turned on, then we are essentially adding 1 plus 1 on our two switches plus the 1 on the carry-in wire, or 1 plus 1 plus 1, which in binary equals 1, 1, or 3 in decimal. The 1, 1 can be seen here because our light bulb is on and our carryout wire is on as well. If we turn off the carry-in wire and turn off our two switches, then our output wires are off as well. Now let's just focus on the full adder as a unit, which we'll just call an adder from this point on. And let's label the wires. We'll use A and B to represent the input from our two switches, and sum to represent the wire to the light bulb. Now let's remove the switches and the light bulb, turn the adder on its side, rearrange our labels, and then zoom out. Now we have 8 adders next to each other, and let's label them from right to left with letters so that we can talk about them separately. We'll add 2 switches above each of our adders to represent our A and B inputs, and then we'll connect a light bulb to each of our sum outputs. The light bulbs, again, can be labeled with their decimal equivalents, 1, 2, 4, 8, and then you just keep multiplying by 2. 8 times 2 is 16, times 2 is 32, 64, and 128. Let's now add an area on the left to see what we're doing. We'll first put the binary numbers that our switches and light bulbs represent, and then a plus sign to represent the adders, and then we'll add the equivalent numbers in decimal form. Finally, we'll put numbers on the adders themselves, showing the current state of each wire coming into the adder and going out, 0 or 1, off or on. Now let's see what happens when we add 1 plus 1. Well, in adder A, the A and B inputs are both 1, and the carry-in wire is off. So it's 1 plus 1 plus 0, which in binary equals 1, 0, causing the carry-out wire to be on and the sum wire to be off. So then in adder B, the A and B inputs are 0, but the carry-in input is 1. So the sum line on adder B is on, causing the 2 light bulb to light up. So 1 plus 1 equals 2. You'll begin to see a little bit more about how this works as we do some more examples. Let's look at 2 plus 2. In adder A, none of the inputs are on in this case, so neither the sum nor the carryout wire is on. Adder B, though, has inputs A and B on, so the carryout wire from adder B is on, which then becomes the carry-in wire to adder C, causing the 4 light bulb to light up, showing that 2 plus 2 equals 4. 3 plus 3 causes adder A on the far right to carry out a 1, which then causes adder B to have to add 1 plus 1 plus 1, which in binary equals 1, 1. So both the sum wire of adder B and the carryout wire of adder B are on, causing the light bulbs under adder B and under adder C to both be on. So 3 plus 3 equals 6. Let's look at a few more examples for you to consider on your own. We won't talk through these, but feel free to pause the video and take a longer look if you'd like. Here is 10 plus 10. Now let's look at 15 plus 12. And finally, 219 plus 36, which adds up to the maximum of our light bulbs, 255. Now this kind of thing happens millions of times a second inside of the microprocessor that fits on the motherboard inside of your computer. So now you've seen how computers add numbers in one lesson.
All right, so that's a basic on how computers count. We definitely want to remember that when we get to networking. Because of networking, when we're dealing with subnet masks, they're converted from what language? When you're doing network, yeah.
If they're converted from what?
What are they converted from? Binary, what we were just talking about.
Oh.
So if you slept on this, or you guys walked in late on this, sorry. So yeah, just as a caveat before we get started with the lecture, I got a call from my boss this weekend. And there's a few of you who have had some tardiness problems. So I just wanted to reaffirm that if you guys call me and let me know what's going on, I won't mark you as being tardy. If you don't call me and you come in late, well, be expecting a write-up. Because if he's going to come at me, you know, I'm going to come at y'all. Most of you have been really good about letting me know when you're going to be late. But yeah, please help me help you. Because I don't want to get into having to do write-ups and then, you know, defend you against the Stride Center as they're trying to, because they're going to go by the books. You know, you've only allowed 6 tardies, and there's somebody that's got 7 already. So, just helpful reminder, because I hate to see anybody get this far into it and be removed from the class. So, without further ado,
The video you just watched, is it on movie?
it is not, but I can send you guys a link.
Yeah.
I can send you a link. It's on YouTube, actually.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to talk about CPUs and memory this week. So there's quite a bit of information.
Just so you can see
So
the
this
screen.
week, we're going to learn about the characteristics and purposes of different processors, Intel and AMD that we're going to focus on. There are more out there, but these are the ones that CompTIA makes you focus on.
On the screen?
We'll learn how to install and upgrade the processor. We've kind of already done that, so we know about zip sockets, right? Zero searches force. So you lift up the little lever and set the chip on and put the lever back down, and that's a zip socket. So we've already kind of been through that. So installing is not going to be a big issue. Upgrading, well, there's a few things you're going to have to know. What does the motherboard support, being the biggest one? So when we think about doing upgrades, we want to keep that in mind. We'll learn about the different kinds of physical memory and how they work, and learn how to upgrade memory as well. So what is a processor? We know it's the brain of the computer. It does all the mathematical computations. And what we just saw on that video, that's all the computer understands, is those ones and zeros. So that is the language it talks in. Two major processor manufacturers, Intel and AMD. Features affecting processor performance and compatibility with motherboards.
For the ATI, AMD, didn't AMD buy ATI?
They do.
So it's like, it's the same, but it's just AMD.
Yeah, AMD does processors. ATI never did. ATI did video cards, and AMD bought them out.
I just came up on AMD with a video.
Yeah, it is pretty funny, actually. All right, so we're going to think about clock speed. The processor supports. That's pretty important. Processor speed itself. It's very important. It's how fast the processor actually works. The socket and chipset the processor can use. Processor architecture, multi-processing abilities, dual processors, multi-core processing, and multi-threading. Memory cache, memory features on the motherboard that the processor can support, support for virtualization, and integrated graphics. So inside of a CPU, you got some basic components that all CPUs share. The input-output unit, or I/O unit, manages data instructions entering and leaving the processor. The control unit manages all activities inside the processor. One or more ALUs, or arithmetic logic units. Right? That's a math unit, in other words. Performs all the logical comparisons and calculations. Registers. They're like RAM. They're like memory. They're small holding area on the processor chip. holds counter data instructions, and addresses ALU is currently processing. Registers are really small, but they're extremely fast. They're almost 100 times faster than your RAM chips, and the RAM chips are incredibly fast as well. So registers, they're actually built onto the processor. So it's lightning fast. And they're not very big either. But they're not really made to be very big. It's just to kind of handle some extra numbers. Yes. Internal memory caches, L1, L2, and L3. Basically, they're very similar to what the registers are. They're a little bit larger, and they're usually located within the die as well. L1 and L2 are always on the chip now. L3 sometimes is on the chip, sometimes on the motherboard. It's going to be very rare that you're going to find one that's still on the motherboard. Back in the 90s, L1, L2, and L3 were all on the motherboard. There was no L1 or L2 on the chip itself. Nowadays, they're all being pretty much built with L3. Buses that can connect components within the processor housing. So within the processor housing itself, there's a bus. And here's a nice representation of a current CPU. Since the Pentium processor was first released in '93, the standard has been for a processor to have 2 ALU units so it can process 2 instructions at once. So your internal memory cache, your control unit, IO unit, all your registers here, that's pretty much how it goes. So the data comes in through your front side bus, or FFB, processed by the IO unit, determines where it's going to go, then it goes to the control unit to get directions for processing, which is going to send it to the ALUs. The ALUs use the internal memory cache, and the registers, think of it as like a workbench. If you're working on something, you have to sit it down for a minute and pick up something else to work on it, and sit it down for a minute and go back to what you were first working on. That's kind of how caching works. So I'm computing these numbers, then I'm going to set them aside for a minute. I'm going to grab some new numbers, compute them, set them aside for a minute. I have to go back to the original ones. It's just the way the computer is actually processing. RAM kind of works in a very similar way as well. These registers and internal memory cache are extremely fast, and they're extremely expensive. Just to have a little bit of cache on your chip can really, really get way up there. Processor frequency, or speed, the frequency at which it computes. It's the speed at which the processor operates internally. And there's a multiplier. The factor multiplied against system bus frequency determines the processor frequency. Right? So if there was no multiplier on your chip, and your chip was running on a front side bus that supported 500 megahertz, your chip, but basically your CPU, would be running at 500 megahertz, which is really slow for a CPU. So if you give it a multiplier, that allows the CPU to perform multiple tasks in each clock cycle of the computer itself. System bus frequency times multiplier equals the processor frequency. So if you give it a ×4 or a ×8 on your processor, there's some processors now that are actually coming out with a ×9. So the CPU is going to be 9 times faster than that front side bus, is basically what that's telling you. So if you do the math, you'll come up with the exact frequency of the processor. But that's your algorithm right there. System bus frequency multiplied by the multiplier equals processor frequency. Processors sold today contain ALUs and registers that can process 32 or 64 bits at a time. And we've heard about 64-bit processors and 32-bit processors. That's all it means. They can handle 32 bits at a time or 64 bits at a time. 3 categories of processors. 32-bit, known as x86, can handle 32-bit instructions from the OS. You got your hybrid processors, which most of you here that have a 64-bit computer at home have a hybrid processor, even though you probably don't know that. It is. A hybrid processor can handle 32-bit OS or a 64-bit OS. AMD produced the first one called AMD 64. 64-bit processors a straight 64-bit. They're like the Itanium from Intel. Requires a 64-bit OS. It can handle 32-bit applications only by simulating 32-bit processing. So there's a lot of things that the Itanium chip is not going to be able to do natively for a home computer. It wouldn't be a good idea, in other words. For a network server, it'd be a fantastic idea, because we're not going to be playing video games or doing any complex video stuff with the server. So it's primarily built for network servers. Simulating can actually be looked up on Google. If it can't do it, it has to fake it. Puts a little more work on the system. Memory cache, L1, L2, and L3. Each core in the processor has its own L1 and L2 caches. These are current processors, of course. Your older ones don't. All cores might share an L3 cache within the processor package. So it improves performance. So what's improving the performance there is the L1 and L2 cache being present on this processor. Now here's the real thing. So a multi-core processor has the components for 4 separate processors inside of one die. And now each core has an L1 and L2 cache. Now if they're sharing an L3 cache, there's going to be a bit of a bottleneck there, as opposed to running a system that, say, has 4 physical processors. Because each of the processors has its own L3 cache, well, then the cores aren't sharing that L3 cache, because the L3 cache isn't very big. So what happens? It fills up and gets put out in the registers, or it gets put out, swapped out to the hard drive as virtual memory. Now, if you have 4 processors and you're not sharing that L3, you're going to have a lot better performance. So is it better to have a multi-core processor? Yes. But is it going to be faster than a multi-processor machine? So if you have a dual core running again neck and neck against a dual processor machine, the dual processor machine is going to smoke the dual core because they're not sharing that L3 cache.
When you just spoke of the L3 and the bottleneck, and then it may get swapped out to the hard drive. There's so much going on in L3. Is that swapping out automatic? Is that something the CPU would do automatically?
No, virtual memory is handled by Windows. That's a Windows feature. Linux has a similar memory swapping issue, but they use an actual partition on the hard drive. The memory controller included in the processor package, significant increase in system performance. And here's a very nice picture of the quad-core processor. So these are 4 processors, for all intents and purposes, built inside of one chip. But you see how they're all sharing this L3 cache, and that's what I was just talking about. They've all got their own L1 and L2, which is nice, because for a while they only had the L1 cache, and they were all sharing 2 and 3 cache. So they're getting better as they go along. So eventually, hopefully, they'll have a shared L3 for multi-core processors, and hopefully that will speed those multi-core processors up. So when we talk about the current speeds, Core i7 up to 3.9 gigahertz, Core i5 up to 3.8 gigahertz. That's just some of the leading chips. So these are all the Intels here. Intel processors. For all Intel processors, they're going to have a number with the processor. So 2 Core i processors identified as the i7-940 and the i7-920. So that 940 and 920 is the one we really want to do some research on, right? Because we know it's an i7 because it says i7. i7 is a type of chip. There's different revisions of each chip. And they each have different features. They each have different amounts of cache memory. There's a lot of differences between those chips. So you definitely want to keep that in mind. You wouldn't want to buy a chip that's less bang for your buck. So knowing these numbers helps. The Centrino. The Centrino is a processor. It's a processor technology where they built in graphics, network adapter, all onto the chip housing. It's made specifically for laptops to help laptops get a little better performance. And here's some AMD processors. I think this is actually getting a little bit dated here. I think they've actually got some that's a little faster now. So selecting and installing a processor. PC repair technician tasks. Assemble a PC from parts, exchange a faulty processor, add a processor, upgrade an existing processor. These might be all the times that we're actually going to deal with replacing chips or adding chips or so on and so on. So you must know how to match a processor to the system and install a processor on the motherboard. First requirement, select a processor the motherboard is designed to support. Select the best processor meeting general system requirements and user needs. You may have to sacrifice performance for cost. So this is all about what is the computer really going to do? What do you need this computer to do? Right? Is it just going to be on the internet and doing Facebook and things like that? Or are we going to actually run AutoCAD to design skyscrapers? So those things we actually have to know. What is the computer going to be used for? And once they tell us what it's going to be used for, then we can do a lot better about putting together a package for them. And if they don't like the first number, we can knock some things down to fit their budget. But knowing what the computer is going to be used for is your major task. So for installing processor, it's pretty simple. Read your motherboard, user guide, follow instructions, use a ground bracelet or anti-static gloves. Open the socket by pushing down on the socket lever and gently push away from the socket. Socket load plate opens. Remove the socket protective cover if it has one. Remove the protective cover from the processor. That's actually the package that you buy it in. Remove the, hold the processor with index finger and thumb and align processor in socket using the gold triangle and right angle mark. So that is actually known as pin 1. Some processors have a little dot. Some of them have a triangle, so on and so on. And you should be able to look at that slot, processor slot on the motherboard. It usually has the same thing. Either it'll have a 1 wrote on it by the, on the motherboard somewhere, or it'll have an arrow. Same thing as your chip. So you just line those two together, line them up, and put the chip in there. And here's a nice representation of that. Here's the little gold triangle right here. That's signifying pin 1. And you should see the same kind of thing. Yeah, there's the right angle mark here. So sometimes you'll have a 1 that's wrote there. Sometimes you'll have a right angle mark just like this. So that just says that this goes here. So it's actually pretty simple. It's kind of hard to mess them up. So you want to ensure the processor aligned correctly in the socket. Return the lever to its locked position. And that's really it. And your thermal paste and add your cooler. And that's really it for installing the processor. And here's your cooler. Understand how cooler posts work. Apply thermal compound if necessary. Verify locking pins. Return counterclockwise as far as it will go. Push down on each locking pin until it pops into the hole. Connect power cord from the cooler fan to the motherboard. So is everybody good with the cooler, installing the cooler? Anybody lost of what they're saying here? Good.
I have a question about thermal paste. What do you look for in thermal paste? Because I bought cheap thermal paste before. What do you look for in thermal paste? It's not the cheap stuff?
I've never heard about any faults in thermal paste. So.
I fix my kids all the time, and then if I use the cheap stuff, it lasts for 2 days.
Really?
But if I use the Arctic Silver, the $12 stuff, not the $7 stuff, it'll last a whole year.
Interesting. Guess that shit runs pretty hot then.
PlayStation, first PlayStation. They broke all the time.
Okay. Okay. I have heard about that actually. Yeah, so maybe it's a heat issue.
It is easier.
Yeah, I haven't heard of anything as far as
money for the
buy this thermal paste as opposed to that. I've never heard of that. Yeah, I've used the same kind of thermal paste on every PC around. Just have to drop
Arctic Silver?
Yeah, I use this stuff here. Radio Shack.
Radio Shack, yeah.
Cheap stuff.
Thermal compound.
Same thing. Alright, so check the BIOS to verify the system recognized the processor after system up and running. Yeah, that's kind of funny. If you put your chip in backwards, are you going to get to BIOS?
No.
Are you going to get any beeps?
No.
No. You won't. Processor has to be installed for BIOS to be able to run post.
So there's some ones where they actually will tell you that it's missing.
Not your CPU, bro. The CPU powers and controls everything, remember that. If there's no CPU, BIOS can't even operate. BIOS has to control the by, get controlled by the CPU.
Yeah.
Yeah, if there's no memory, well, the chip's still there. You can tell you that. They can tell you that there's no memory, they can tell you there's no video card, but if there's no CPU, you turn it on, you're just going to get nothing. There's no BIOS or anything. And so yeah, we can see that it's recognized by the BIOS. I guess it would be a good idea that after you put in your processor and turn it on, you do get a post. Check BIOS anyway, make sure it's recognized at the correct speed. That I can understand. Maybe the multiplier didn't get set right or it's not running at the correct speed. I can see that. So the LGA, pretty much the same thing. Yeah, we're not going to go into each one of those. They're all the same. They just look a little bit, they look a little bit different, but they're really all the same. You just got to know how to match pin 1 from the chip to the motherboard.
Oh, you know what? I read this, what I figured out earlier today when I was reading, and I used this one. LGA is the land grid array. Yes. The socket and the pin number is the same.
Really?
Because like the LGA 775, it has 75 pins. I mean, get 75 pins to go into 75 holes. Just notice that's what I was trying to do the reading.
So that's 7-4.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of lost.
And in the book, it's in the book. And I might have it wrong. I'm pretty sure I got it backwards. But it was saying that every time it, like on, the little chart that was up there that you had up there, how it may have like 7, it would say, for instance, like the LGA the LGA 2100 2011, the 2011 socket, and then the processor, that's what I got wrong. The processor and the socket has the same amount of pin holes. Yeah, I didn't know that. I knew it, but I didn't know it.
Right.
It dawned on me like a light bulb.
Yeah, 775 designates 775 pins.
Right, right. It dawned, I knew it, but it just kind of, it was one of those like,
Right. Yeah. So some chips actually have some notches. And notice there's notches on the processor slot as well. Another helpful, little thing there to help you get it into the correct socket correctly. Let's see. Any difference between Intel and AMD? Nope, they're pretty much the same. Random access memory. That's our RAM. That's our memory chips. Holds data and instructions used by the CPU. Static RAM, SRAM, and dynamic RAM, DRAM. Both are volatile memory. What does volatile memory mean?
It's not there long.
It can be lost easily.
It can be lost easy. I like that.
Yeah. It's like this SRAM stays on until
They're both static. They're both volatile memory. Exactly. If I've got 16 gigs of RAM and I've got 16 gigs of data loaded in my RAM and I pull the plug,
right,
all the data that's in that RAM is gone. It's to the ether. It's gone. That's volatile RAM. That's volatile memory.
So you back up.
Variations of DRAM. The DIMM, the dual inline memory module, which is one that we use commonly today. You've got the small outline DIMM, or SODIMM. It's for laptops. Micro DIMMs used on sub-notebook computers, really small ones. You've got RIM and SIM, which are both outdated technology, but we're still going to cover them. Differences among DIMM, RIM, and SIM modules. The data path width for each module accommodates. That's the lanes of freeway that it talks to the CPU with. How data moves from system bus to module. Here's some nice pictures here. This is the old RIM chip here, 184 pins, and it's got 2 notches here. You got your 168-pin SDRAM DIMM. It's also got 2 notches. Then we get up to the DDR, your standard DDR, only got 1 notch. Same thing with your DDR2 and DDR3. Notice that the notches have changed. So if you put those chips all together and look at the different notches, you should be able to tell which kind of chip they are just by looking at the notches. Of course, that's going to take a while. That's practice.
Do you have any of them? I've never seen them.
I think we do, actually.
There's one right
We
here.
do. I think we do. There's some of the older stuff here, 72-pin Sims and the 30-pin Sims. I actually remember buying those for my first computer that I upgraded. Well, not my first computer, but my first PC. So, dual inline memory module, 64-bit data path. Independent pins on opposite sides of the module. Older DIMMs, asynchronous with system bus, and you've got synchronous DRAM or SDRAM runs synchronous runs with the system bus. 2 notches and uses 168 pins. Double data rate SDRAM, also called DDR SDRAM and SDRAM2 and DDR. 2 times faster than SDRAM. DDR2 SDRAM, faster than DDR and uses less power. DDR3 SDRAM, faster than DDR and uses less power. DDR2 and DDR3 both use 240 pins. They're not compatible. You can't put them in the same slot just because the notches are different. So that's a good thing. You're not going to be able to put a DDR into a DDR2 slot or a DDR3 into a DDR1 slot. Not going to fit. Factors that affect capacity, features, and performance of DIMMs. The number of channels that they use. How much RAM is on one module. Speed, error checking abilities, and buffering. Early single-channel DIMMs, the memory controllers access one DIMM at a time. And so you can just put one chip in there and be just fine. You don't have to put them in as duals or as a pair. Dual channels. Memory controller communicates with 2 DIMMs at the same time. Doubles your memory access speed. So when you hear about dual channeling, you know, if your computer supports it and you're not using it, you might want to think about it. It'll double your memory speed. So the way dual channeling works, you're going to have 2 slots that are set up in one channel. Usually you're going to have 2 sets of those. You put 2 chips in one of the slots. Usually they're spread apart and they're color coded. So you'll have a black and a blue slot and a black and a blue slot. So you take the 2 black slots and put a chip in each one. It recognizes the memory from both those modules, and it's set up for dual lining or dual channeling. So you're going to be able to actually access both sides of both chips at the same time. So the computer's accessing that entire bank at one time. The older technologies did not allow you to do that. It took a lot longer.
What if you put 2 sticks in the black and one black, one blue? As a pair like that.
Rephrase that for me.
You put 2 sticks in the one in the black. They're black and blue, right?
Uh-huh.
As you said, put instead of.
So you mean one in the black and one in the blue?
Yes.
You're not dual channeling.
Did you increase the amount of memory?
Yes.
But you're not dual channeling.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you took and did it the right way, you still have the same amount of memory, but you'd be accessing it twice as fast. So that's the advantage of dual and triple channeling, because there is triple channeling out now as well. Triple channels access 3 DIMMs at once. So we went from the early days of the dual inline memory module, where you could only access one side of the chip. Then they made it to where you could access both sides of the chip, so they already doubled our speed. Now with dual channeling and triple channeling, they've actually doubled our speed again. So that's the real advantage of dual and triple channeling. So it's allowing us to talk to both sides of both chips at the same time. Quad channeling, introduced with the Intel Sandy Bridge chipset and processors using 8 memory slots. Processors can access 4 slots at a time using 2 different channels. It's the same thing, they just increased the number. So if you got 8 slots, you would definitely, and your board supports quad channel, you would definitely want to do it. Drastic increase in speed. So setting up dual channeling, a pair of DIMMs in a channel must be equally matched, size, speed, and features. They don't necessarily always have to be the same manufacturer, but you want your memory chips to be the exact same features and speed. And even then, if they're not the same manufacturer, sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. Sometimes memory modules do not like to play well with others. Sometimes they want to have the same chips all the way across. Sometimes you can use 4 different chips and it'll work. It just really depends on the system and the chips themselves. The recommendation would be to use the same manufacturer with the same specs. That's what they say here. And so yeah, the DIMMs and channel A slots, see how they're spread apart? You got one here and one here. It's the same thing. So you're dual channeling all 4 of these chips in this picture here. Triple channeling, going to be the same way. Notice how they're all color coded, so you can't screw it up. If you got 3 black slots and 3 blue slots, that's telling you got a triple channeling board, and you got to populate all 3 blue ones or all 3 black ones to make it work. DIMM speed measured in megahertz and PC rating. The PC rating is the total bandwidth between the module and the CPU. DDR2 PC rating is usually labeled PC2, and the same thing with DDR3. It's usually labeled as PC3. So if you see PC2 on a memory module, you'll know it's DDR2. PC3 designates DDR3. We got a single-sided DIMM, memory chips installed on one side of the module. A double-sided DIMM, where memory chips are installed on both sides of the module. Memory bank. Memory processor addresses at one time, 64-bit wide, dual ranked. DIMMs providing 2 or more banks reduces overall memory price at the expense of performance. Error correcting code detects and corrects error in a single bit. Right? So our computers, most of our computations are done in 8-bit. So the 9th bit is the parity bit. The 9th bit is the bit that they actually do the error checking. So if you're running some servers a lot of times have ECC memory. Error correcting code is what ECC stands for. It's a lot more expensive. Matter of fact, there's a lab this week that's going to actually have you do an upgrade on the computers in here. And these computers actually have ECC memory. So you'll be amazed when you see how expensive the ECC memory is compared to standard memory. And you wouldn't really want to use it on a normal computer. I mean, having it on these computers really is not going to do us very much. But if you had it on a server, just talking to 100 people at a time, well, sometimes memory has errors. And that memory has the ability to check and fix the error, which is really nice. Buffered and registered DIMMs hold data and amplify signal before data is written. So when you have some questions about buffered memory, that's what buffered memory is for. To hold data and amplify the signal before the data is written. Registered DIMM uses registered. It's kind of the same thing as buffering. Just gives you a little bit of extra shelf space, as we were talking about before, for the memory itself. An unbuffered DIMM has no buffers or register support. Fully buffered DIMM, or FBDIMM, uses advanced buffering techniques, allows servers to support large number of DIMMs. So we're talking about buffered DIMMs that hold data and amplify the signal before written. If you've got a lot of memory modules, that's when you're gonna really run into that, where the buffering is really going to be necessary. Notches on the module indicate supported technologies. CAS latency and RAS latency. Column access strobe or CAS latency, row access strobe or RAS latency, both refer to the number of clock cycles it takes to write or read a column or row of data off a memory module. CAS latency is used more than RAS latency. Lower values are better than higher. So when we're talking about latency, latency means slowness, right? How long does it take? So if it takes a bigger number, then you have slower memory modules. If it takes a lower number, then you have faster memory. So if your CAS latency is 2 as opposed to 5, then your memory module is going to be way faster with the 2.
Oh, it's an actual number, not like milliseconds or time?
It's a number. It means nanoseconds.
Yeah, nanoseconds. Yeah.
So memory module provide a CAS latency value within a series of timing numbers. Example 555 and 15. So that's going to be some of the ratings that we're talking about here. That's your CAS latency, RAS latency, so on and so forth. RAM bus, direct RAM bus, DRAM, also known as RDRAM, direct RDRAM, RAM bus, or RIM module. Expensive and slower than current DIMMs. RIMs using 16-bit data bus, 2 notches, 184 pins. 32-bit RIMs are using 1 notch and 232 pins. And then you got a CRIM, which is interesting. Now with DIMMs, you can just put 1 chip in there and be good. But when you're talking about RIMs, say if I just had 1 memory module, 4 gigabyte memory module I throw in there, there's a spacer that actually has to be installed with that chip in another slot. Because the RIMs are supposed to be in numbers of 2, multiples of 2.
RIM is legacy, right? All
Yes,
technology.
it's
So
pretty much dead.
yeah, is that why? I guess is that why you no longer have problems with redundancy when installing memory? You can install 1.
Just different
Nowadays,
technologies.
different.
Just different technologies.
So you got away from that technology.
Yeah. The old Sims were like that as well. The old
Yeah.
30-pin Sims, they had to be installed in groups of 2. So the CRIM is not a memory chip. Ensures continuity through all the slots. And it's a placeholder module. It's all tits.
Right.
I don't have one of those. Memory performance factors to consider. Total number of RAM, that's pretty important. The memory technology used, that's very important. Speed of memory in megahertz, PC rating or nanoseconds, ECC or non-ECC, cache latency or row latency rating, single, dual, triple, or quad channeling. So when we're thinking about buying computers or fixing these computers, these are all the things right here. This is our checklist. Okay, what kind of motherboard does this guy got? What's the support? Okay, what's the recommended cache latency and RAS latency for this memory? Those are all things that have to be considered. Does it have quad or at least triple channeling on it? You know, if we're trying to give somebody a faster machine, we're going to want to use all the technologies that machine supports. So if they're not dual channeling, by the time you leave there, they better be dual channeling, right? So those are all the things we're going to have to consider. Connectors inside memory slots are tin or gold. Edge connectors on memory modules follow suit. Match connectors to prevent corrosive chemical reactions between metals. Basic technique, add more RAM modules, right? That's how to upgrade memory. That's a basic technique, add more, right? So what would adding more memory do for you? It's going to speed your performance up. It's going to allow some of those applications to load. It's going to give you a more stable system. You're going to get rid of the Windows insufficient memory error message. So how much RAM do I need? And how much is currently installed? So how much you got in there now? You guys are running on 512? Wow, you know. Probably want to bump that up. How much memory does this motherboard support? It only supports 2 gigs? Fine, we'll give you 3 more 512 chips or however we got to do it. And bring you up to the max that motherboard support. That's generally the way it's done. How many and what kind of memory modules are currently installed on my motherboard? That's pretty big too. And how many slots are on it? Because if you only got 2 slots and the board supports 16 gigabytes, well, you're going to want to know that before you go buy 4 gigabyte chips and there's only 2 slots. You might want to consider buying 2 8 gigabyte chips to max it out. How do I select and purchase the right modules for my upgrade? How do I physically install the new modules? So how much memory do I need? Best answer, all you can get. What does the motherboard support? Windows 7 requires at least. That is so wrong. That is so wrong. If you look at the Microsoft website, it says that you need 1 gigabyte.
Yeah.
However, I've actually installed it with 256 and it runs.
Good.
So yeah, at least a gigabyte, I would say. I don't agree with that. 32-bit processors. I think we touched on this a little bit. 32-bit processors can only address up to 4 gigabytes of RAM. That is a limitation within the processor architecture. 64-bit processor, that limitation has went away. Windows 7 on a 64-bit machine can run 192 gigabytes of RAM. On a Windows 8 machine, you can run 512 gigabytes of RAM. So 4 gigs or 512 gigs. That's like the spectrum for 32 versus 64-bit processors.
I have a question. So, say you have a gig in your computer, but the max is 4. Would it be better to get 4 1 gig sticks, or could you get a 2 gig and a 1 gig stick?
That really depends on the type of machine. What type of architecture is on the motherboard? Is it going to be a dual channel motherboard? If it's a dual channel motherboard, then yeah, you would want to have 4 1 gigabyte chips. For sure. So, if we don't know what's in the machine, we'll open the case and look at the memory slots. How many slots are available? How many are filled? Review the module imprint. Take the chip out, take a look at it, see what it is, see what's already in there. By looking at that chip, you're going to be able to know its speeds, whether it has ECC or not, what kind of chip it is, so on and so on. Yes.
So we can't find this out without opening the computer through like Stucky or through some other thing?
Absolutely. Sure you can.
And either tell us, it's going to read our computer and tell us what's in there already.
It's going to tell you what you have, and it'll even a lot of times show you the empty slots that you have. However, yeah, I mean that works. You can use you can use Speccy. Best thing to do is open it up. Is open it up, or if you've got a motherboard book that talks about that computer, that's really nice as well. If you're talking to somebody on the phone, what model of Dell do you have? Oh, it's that model. You can look that up and find it yourself in minutes.
All right, I'm just thinking.
So you could already come to
practical
that.
purposes, you don't want to. I mean, opening up is great. It's good, like, but you want to do your homework before you open it. I want to have everything I need right there. I don't want to have to open it up and
Right.
figure what I need and go run to the store. You know.
Absolutely. That's why when you're talking to the people, you find out what kind of machine you're running. You can have that stuff all done. You can get back to them with a price, come out with the memory modules, and then do the upgrade there. That is the best way to do it. But then once you get out there, right, who's to say what kind of chips that they've installed in there extra, or maybe somebody's removed some chips extra. So if you're actually on premises, either open it up, run Speccy or something. But you can get a basic feel for how much the motherboard supports just by looking it up on the manufacturer's website. So if it's a specific model of Gateway or Dell or whatever, you can find out how much that motherboard will support before you go out, which is nice. Read motherboard documentation, see if the board supports dual, triple, or quad channels. That's pretty important. Last resort, take the motherboard to an old memory modules to a good computer parts store for confirmation. I really hope you guys don't have to do that.
I got the right one.
If it was a 1990 model, then maybe I could see that. But even then. DIMM modules can be installed as single modules. They don't have to be installed as pairs anymore. Motherboards supporting dual channeling install matching DIMMs in each channel for best performance. DDR3 boards supporting triple channeling. For best performance, install 3 matching DIMMs and triple channel slots. Motherboard using DDR3 triple channeling DIMMs, use 3 matching DIMMs and the 3 blue slots. If 4 slot is populated, or reverse to single channeling. So on a triple channeling motherboard, you're going to have 3 blue slots. That's the triple channel. And you're going to probably have a black slot. So if you have everything triple channel, you throw another memory module in there, it's going to revert back to single channeling, and you're going to lose that triple channel feature. So installing dual channeling, install 2 matching DIMMs and 2 blue slots that are farthest from the processor. Leave the other 2 slots empty unless you have more memory. You can dual channel both memory banks. For 1 installed DIMM, place it in the blue slot farthest from the position of the processor.
What's going on with the architecture that you're going to be far from the processor? What's with the architecture that you want to be furthest from the processor?
Furthest from the processor, namely the first memory slot. Okay. That's just kind of a standard. It's like 0, 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
Serial presence detect declares module size, speed, and voltage, and data path width to the system BIOS at startup. today's memory always supports SPD. Right? So what do you think that does? What does serial presence detect actually do?
So if you don't have it in there, it'll be right.
Unless you configure it correctly.
Oh, yeah. I mean, say if you change the frequency on it, right? You try to overclock the memory.
But what's the real feature of SPD?
Was here it says it's standard module high speed.
Yeah, it tells the BIOS. Tells the BIOS exactly what type of memory chips you just installed.
Yeah.
That's really all it is. There was a time when you actually had to define everything to the motherboard. Serial presence detect allows us not to have to do that. Okay, motherboard using DDR DIMMs with dual channeling allows 3 different DDR DIMM speeds in 1 to 4 sockets supporting dual channeling. 2 blue memory slots and 2 black memory slots. For dual channeling, matching DIMMs must be installed in the 2 blue sockets. If 2 DIMMs installed in the 2 black sockets, they must match each other. Same thing. If you're going to be dual channeling, you want both sets of chips to match each other. Now you can have a CAS latency of 8 on one bank of chips and a CAS latency of 5 on the other chips. You can have a little bit 2 features between the 2 as long as they match each other. So with each dual lining set that you're creating, those characteristics are going to have to match. That's what you want. Pentium motherboard using DDR DIMMs. Example, motherboard using 168-pin single-sided DIMM modules. Documentation says to use unbuffered 3.3 volt ECC PC100 DIMM SDRAM modules. PC100 modules should be ready to work with a motherboard running at 100 MHz. You choose to use or not use the ECC modules. BIOS setup should show the feature disabled if you're not going to use it. 3 DIMM slots on the board. Sockets hold 1 bank of memory. RIM modules are no longer made. Replace 1 or more CRIMs with RIMs. Remember, the CRIM is the placeholder. Match new RIMs with existing RIMs. So again, if you're going to have 2 RIMs, you want to make sure they have the same characteristics, the same features. Compromises if exact match is not available. Mixing unbuffered memory with buffered, registered memory will not work. So they'll actually work together, but the registered memory features will not. Match memory module manufacturer if possible. Try using memory from 2 different manufacturers. Definitely want to try it out. It may or may not work. If mixing memory speeds, all modules perform at the slowest speeds. It's always going to be the case with a computer. You're never going to, get more speed out of something that's not designed to give you that. It's the same thing with USB. If you plug in a USB 3.0 drive into a 1.0 socket, you're only talking a USB 1.0. Using a website to research your purchase. Look for search utility matching modules to board. There's a few good websites out there to help you do this.
The one they use the best one.
Crucial Memory is probably the best one. Kingston's not bad. So how do we install memory? Make sure we got our ground bracelet on, right? Turn off the power, unplug the power cord, press the power button to remove any residual power. Remove the case cover. Handle memory modules with care. Don't touch the edges on the memory modules, because the oils on your skin could actually be corrosive. Do not stack cards or modules. Look for notches on one side or in the middle for correct orientation. Right? Make sure it's going to fit. Installing DIMMs. Pull out the supporting arms on the side of the slot. Use notches on the DIMM edge connector as a guide. Insert the DIMM straight down into the slot, ensuring that the arms lock back into position, which is going to secure the chip onto the board. New installations are generally uncomplicated. Usually involve placing memory on the motherboard, basically just put the chip in the slot. Older computers may need to change to CMOS setup. If new memory is not recognized, try reseating the device. Right? So if first it sits in there and doesn't come up, try reseating it. Sometimes that helps. Yes. Yeah, a lot of computers, if you add more memory to it the first time you turn it back on, you will get a BIOS message. And it'll say, we've noticed that the system memory has changed. Hit F2 to go into setup or F1 to continue. Once you hit continue, it updates it in BIOS, and BIOS says, okay, this is the new memory I've got. If you go into setup, you can actually look and see exactly what's being, well, most BIOSes, you can see exactly what's installed in the machine. RIMs. Install RIMs beginning with bank 0. That's the farthest one from the chip. And that's how computers get used to that. They start counting at 0. So if there's 4 modules or 4 banks, those banks are 0, 1, 2, and 3. That's how computers count.
From the process.
So if the CRIM's already in the slot, remove it, insert the module where the CRIM was, straight down into the socket. The clip should pop back into place. That's pretty much standard with all memory modules. You pull the little levers out, pop the chip in, and the levers come back up to hold the chip in place. So in summary, processor is the most important motherboard component. 2 major manufacturers are Intel and AMD. Processors are rated by the speed of the system bus, the socket and chipset, processor architecture, multi-core rating, internal memory cache, amount and type of RAM, and computing technologies. Memory cache inside the processor housing can be L1, L2, and L3 cache. Core of the processor has 2 arithmetic logic units, and each core can process 2 threads at a time. Does anybody know the name of the technology that allows the processor to support 2 threads at a time?
Hyperthreading.
Hyperthreading. Very good. Current families of Intel processors include Core, Atom, Celeron, and Pentium. So you got your Core 2 Duo, your Core i3, Core i5, Core i7. Current AMD processors family include FX, Phenom, Athlon, and Sempron. Select a processor that the motherboard supports. When installing, always follow directions in the motherboard user guide. DRAM is stored on 4 kinds of modules: DIMM, SODIMM, RIM, and SIM. DIMMs can be single-sided or double-sided. DIMMs can work together in dual, triple, or quad channels. DIMM and RIM speeds are measured in megahertz or PC rating. The memory controller can check memory for errors and possibly correct those errors using ECC. Buffers and registers are used to hold data and amplify a data signal. RIMs require that every RIM slot be populated. When upgrading memory, use the type, size, and speed the motherboard supports. That's pretty much it.
AMD refers to hyperthreading as hypertransport.
Yeah, is that what they're calling it?
Yeah. It's hyperthreading is like proprietary.
Yeah, they've got their own name for all that stuff. We talked a little bit about virtualization support for your CPUs. That's a big one. These computers here, they don't have it. But on your computers at home, you may have it. So that's going to assist you in running programs like VirtualBox and VMware Player and Microsoft Hyper-V, which are all hypervisors that allow you to virtualize systems. And a lot of the machines that I've worked on, matter of fact, all of them that have had hardware-assisted virtualization have all been turned off by default in BIOS. So be familiar with your BIOS. Be familiar with the settings that are within BIOS and what it allows you to change. Other than that, I think we're pretty good for this lecture. Any questions on CPUs and memory?
In the lecture, you spoke about memory having errors. Do memory errors originate in the registry?
What was the question?
Memory errors can originate from just about
anywhere? Okay.
Yeah, especially like I say for a server might be talking to 100 people at once. So you might be copying or trying to copy 100 files at once, plus do an email, and sometimes we get errors. Sometimes code just, if that machine's taking a real beating, a lot of users, you can run into some errors.
Okay.
So that's really it. We'll go ahead and get started on our labs. There's some BG labs and there's some good ones this week, so enjoy. And we should be finding out a day on our family day pretty soon. I talked to Isaiah today, and family day is rapidly approaching, and we'll know more about
We'll
it
have
soon.
food, entertainment, Jeopardy. It's gonna be cool. It's way cool. It's actually family night. I don't want to call it family day. It's usually family night.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it is cool.
Where's it gonna be at?
Usually it's at the warehouse, but I guess it could be at the warehouse because the warehouse is closing. But it's not closing.
Closing.
Friday night is where you can bring your family and they see what we're doing. And the warehouse is closing. Only God knows why. That's not the only warehouse. The warehouse in Richmond. Fixing to open. Maybe like he's open. I'm not sure.
I can know that.
I'm gonna need that character.
Yeah, Lab 5.1 is remove and replace a CPU. You guys are welcome to use one of the display boards out there. We've already kind of done this, so if you want to do it, please do it. Because it's not bad to get more practice, but if you feel you've got enough experience with CPUs, I'm fine with that as well. The lab's actually pretty light. Okay, well, let me try. Alright, so when you unplug and unplug, you look the little lights, so you plug it in. Do you get any wing lights? No wing lights? Follow the end of the cable. Follow the other end of the cable.
Pick up your jewelry.
Plug in. If you
We're gonna make sure this
45, there's
metal
a
part right here,
if you're not getting those,
you gotta make sure
follow
it's
the other
clean
end
on
of the
you.
cable and see if it's plugged in. And probably came unplugged. You should get a wing light, which means you have copper connectivity.
So where's the one? Where's the
Don't lose my power though. What you doing? Take my power. You can use power though. It'll go about it for a minute.
That's actually the bad one right there. Underline that. A heads up for homework 5.1. Do not use the link in the book. It will give you a virus.
Yeah. I didn't get one, but.
Yeah, if you look at hands off 5.1, yeah, underline that link. Yeah.
You know, we downloaded this stuff the other night, okay? So it's already on.
Right.
Okay, so what are we doing? We're gonna do that.
You wanna take out the process?
What are we doing? You gotta go back to it.
I know. We can see that.
It should be on the desktop, it's not on the desktop. Well, I put something on the desktop.
Jay,
It's something I want.
never mind, I got it. Never mind, I got it.
Come on.